So now Tau and Kroot have a hyperviolent melee unit in the form of the Krootox Riders, and we now know their full rules. Let's talk through the profile and stat line of the Krootox Rampagers and how good they're looking in game. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Tau and Kroot once more, and in this video I thought we'd do a focus review of the Krootox Rampagers and their full datasheet rules in Codex Tau Empire. It seems that Codex Tau has leaked to the internet and there's plenty of interesting stuff to dig into. I'll certainly be back in a few hours to talk through some of that, though I thought it would be nice to take a focused look at this violent unit first. In the lore, these Krootox Rampagers are juvenile Krootox with greater aggression and agility compared with their elders. They're apparently used by the Kroot hunting packs that fight alongside the Tau and act as outriders, ambushers, and terror troops for the Kroot, displaying a great deal of bravery and charging through enemy lines, rampaging through their formations, followed up by the rest of the kindred as they plunge into the heart of the foe, putting shattered enemy lines to the hunting knife and Kroot rifle as they consolidate their advance. The miniatures are the three that you can see here. They're going to be coming in the Kroot Hunting Pack box set at this weekend at time of recording. They were perhaps one of the bigger and more exciting surprises of this recent Kroot range refresh. Pretty cool Kroot cavalry and expanding the options that they have in game, and really quite a significant unit for the Tau Empire army in general, actually giving them a dedicated melee unit that can effectively tangle with things that aren't just the lightest of infantry. And I'm sure they'll be a pretty interesting unit to consider within the army as a result, if their points costed right. The Kroot Hunting Pack box set does look like it's going to come at an overall discount for things. These guys are likely to be around the £37, €50 or $60 mark, kind of similar to other factions, bikers and cavalry units, when Games Workshop does eventually get round to listing them individually, which could be a month or two yet. As ever, if you were looking to pick up the Kroot Hunting Pack box set or any other Games Workshop goodies, I do have a few discount retailers linked down in the video description. I believe that Kroot Hunting Pack box set will be going on sale at around 10 AM Australia and UK time, and midnight on the Friday turning to the Saturday at Central Time for the USA and Canada. So feel free to check out any of these ones, links down in the video description as a first port of call. They're probably falling back to Games Workshop's web store if they wound up having it underproduced quite a lot. Could be a way to save a bit of money, and buying anything through these does help support Auspex Tactics as well. The links to these are below every single video. Getting into their datasheet rules though, and let's talk through what the Rampagers can bring to the table in these young and dangerous Krootox cavalry. In the Codex you can take between 3 to 6 of them per unit. The points costs aren't yet confirmed, Games Workshop will be releasing those digitally, and given just how much of a disparity they have between the printed Codex points and their digital downloads as they did with the Dark Angels ones, it genuinely isn't likely getting too hung up on those at this point. They'll probably follow when the Tau Codex is fully released, so unfortunately a bit of a way to go before we get those confirmed. What we can do is see exactly how they'll be used in game. They've got a stat line of a 7-inch move, toughness 6, a 5+ save and 5 wounds, leadership 7 and objective control 2. They're a mounted unit, and besides the things you'd expect, they have the Kroot and grenades keywords. I feel like that stat line had some interesting bits, but some things that I was expecting. Not really too surprised to see toughness 6 and a 5+ save. 5 wounds is honestly more than I expected. I was honestly guessing 3 or 4 for these guys. Seems that they'll be pretty much just as hard to take out as the big chunky Krootox rider, which is interesting. Perhaps the thing that was a surprise for the negative though is that they only have movement 7, just by the way that the models look and the way that they say they're a bit more agile than the other Kroot. They look like they're hurtling towards the foe. Movement 7 is less than I would have hoped for. I was honestly getting a little bit less durability and a little bit less movement, which is going to be an issue trying to get them to melee around terrain as a mounted unit. Weapons wise, these guys will hit you with a whole bunch of different profiles of weapons, first shooting, then charging with multiple attacks, and also their special rule for impact hits. First, when they shoot, they get to strike with their pistols and hunting javelins. These are a 12-inch combined shooting profile for each model, getting 2 attacks at ballistic skill 4+, strength 4, AP 0 and damage 1, and they both have the assault and the pistol keyword. In general, I guess you'd only want to advance them if they're not going to be able to charge anything, as otherwise that's going to stop them charging. Having assault weapons in the unit can be handy for playing the mission though. It means that you could potentially advance up to a midfield objective and do an action or something. Having 6 OC for a unit of 3 of them does mean that you might be able to take a point for cleanse or something. And it does mean that if they get locked up in a protracted combat, they can still blaze away with a few pistol-like small arms. For their melee profiles, they get these split as well. The hunting blades are the ones that are carried by the riders, as you can see here. You get 3 attacks at weapon skill 3+, strength 4, AP 1 and damage 1 with the lance keyword. In general, that's going to just help out a bit against lighter infantry. Lance does mean they should actually be stacking a few more saves against tougher stuff as well. Even things like Imperial Knights will be wounded on 5+ on the charge with those. In close combat though, the main event is absolutely the scary Krootoxen themselves. Again, they get a kind of similar profile to the big chunky gun-mounted Krootox. Each one of them gets 4 attacks at weapon skill 3+, strength 6, AP 1 and damage 2, or with sustained hits 1 for extra hits landed on the foe. It is really quite a lot of volume attacks, though it is more effective against some units than others. Anything with a 2+ save or toughness 7 or above isn't going to care as much, but it will absolutely do a number on standard sized Space Marines, and just the sheer volume of attacks is going to stack some wounds on the foe. Given sustained hits 1, you will be averaging 10 hits at that profile, which is pretty terrifying for just a unit of 3. Finally, for their special rules, they get Scout 7 inches, though they don't get Stealth as plenty of the other Kroot units do. I guess they're a bit more lumbering, big and hefty. Scout 7 inches is definitely handy to have on a scary damage dealer type unit, means that you could push them up towards the midfield if you get first turn, and even if you go second, it might well be good to try and take a place in, say, a midfield ruin that's out of line of sight. If you could use that move to get up towards, say, a hidden point on the battlefield that can still threaten the charge on a midfield objective, I think you'd generally be in for a good time. Then finally though, for the last bit of damage that they can do, is their Line Breakers special rule. Each time this unit ends a charge move, you select one enemy unit within engagement range, and then you get to roll 1d6 for each model in this unit that's within engagement range of that enemy unit. For each 4+, the enemy suffers d3 mortal wounds, and as a bonus to that, if you actually slay a model, they take a battle shock test as well, which occasionally could be relevant for things like secondary objectives that complete at the end of the turn, or any stratagems they might have wanted to use in the fight phase. Beyond that though, battle shock tests in your own turn for the enemy aren't really all that big a deal. If you can get this rule to go off maximally, I think it really is a very meaningful damage increase to the unit. The mortal wounds will help out most against anything that the Krootox Rampagers might struggle with their mid-strength and low AP. Realistically though, I think you are usually not going to be able to make this go off absolutely optimally. Terrain and other models might be in the way, plus you just might not have the movements to get the entirety of their unit all into engagement range, which is actually within 1 inches of the enemy unit, and not just, say, within fighting in 2 ranks sort of range. But either way, you will at least have a chance of some mortal wounds each time the unit makes contact. Putting all of that damage output together, and here's roughly what you can expect out of a unit. For a unit of 3 of them shooting, charging, then fighting, here's roughly what you can expect if the stars align and you do manage to get into engagement range with all of them. They do absolutely go through lighter infantry very easily indeed. You'd kill around about 14 termagants or guardsmen, so pretty ruinous to hordes there. It's not much better news for standard issue Space Marines with those big damage 2 claws. You'd kill around about 5 or 6 power armoured Space Marines. Given the mortal wound impact hits, they're actually surprisingly efficient against Terminators as well. 2 to 3 of those killed on average just with sheer AP1 volume attacks, plus the mortal wounds, though their damage does drop off a little bit more against tougher stuff like toughness 10 vehicles or land raiders, though still they will take a big chunk out of them. Basically, if these guys get the charge, they really are pretty destructive, though I would bear in mind that for the higher toughness targets, 3 wounds on each of those is on average coming out of their engagement range line breakers rule. So if you weren't able to do an optimal charge, or if you would charge yourself, you wouldn't get that, and their numbers would look far more mediocre against Terminators, Toughness 10 vehicles, and Land Raiders. Still though, even mortal wounds aside, they could be really quite intimidating in a big unit of 6 of them. You're almost certainly not going to get all of those into engagement range, but they'll be even more savage against just stacking sheer amounts of AP1 saves on the enemy. Plus I feel like they could be a big and chunky unit that's tough enough that the enemy might really struggle to charge them. Having a massive 30 wounds at toughness 6 is pretty intimidating even for dedicated melee units, and if you don't manage to wipe out a significant amount of them, they're going to hit you back pretty hard with those mass fist attacks. Otherwise, for buffs and synergies within Codex Tau Empire, they don't have leader options, the Lone Spear goes his own way, and there aren't any mounted shapers, though a few of the characters can still help out a bit. The Lone Spear can mark a unit for reroll hits, say fire a sniper rifle at a unit, and then that's reroll the hit rolls. That does last into the fight phase, so it means that you get a boosted plus 33% damage to your attacks if you went to charge in afterwards, though that wouldn't affect the mortal wound damage output. Otherwise, the Trail Shaper, I feel like they could be a particularly good target for them to redeploy. You get to use his redeploy after first turn, so you could potentially move these to somewhere more threatening across the side of the board and then do a scout move, potentially trying to just barrel them up one side of the board if you've got first turn maybe, or just move them maybe somewhere a little bit more cagier, somewhere where you can scout move into a line of sight blocking ruin if the opponent happens to get first turn. Otherwise, I guess theoretically the Warshaper could be used to cancel Battle Shot once per game. I feel like that's hardly going to be enough to really try and coordinate around though. For unit support, they really only get all that much out of the Kroot detachment. The other detachments don't have loads for them. As shown off by Games Workshop rules though, I feel like the core rules for the Kroot detachment really are quite good. A 5+ invulnerable save against ranged attacks is pretty much exactly what these guys want. They're big and tough enough that the enemy probably will be firing heavy weapons against them and negating that 5+ save, so being able to shrug off 1/3 of all the las cannons and missile launcher hits that come their way seems pretty good. Otherwise, the Kroot detachment gives you a +1 to hit units below starting strength, so all those volume attacks hitting on a 2+ there, and I feel like given the damage output of this squad that could genuinely be worth trying to coordinate. If you can find some shooting to chip a bit of damage off the enemy target, you are going to add up to a significant amount more damage in close combat. You probably just want to make sure that you're not shooting down the unit to the extent where you're going to be making the charge too much longer and risk them failing it and getting no damage at all. If they ever could get the +1 to wound on an enemy unit, then all well and good. Probably just going to be worth not thinking about that too much and embrace it when it comes up. I guess against really big tough targets, you might be able to focus enough firepower to say down a super heavy vehicle to say 12 wounds or less, and then maybe that might give them the push they need that a unit like this could wipe them out. Otherwise, for stratagems in the detachment, I feel like by far the best is the Hidden Hunters one command point to hide the unit from any firepower greater than 12 inches away is scary and pretty problematic for the enemy. That would be really quite nasty on a big unit of 6 of these guys. You could have them in a pretty bold and threatening position in the midboard, ready to make charges onto any units in the centre, and then if the opponent's got a big gun line focused on them, you can just say no, that unit's going to be fine. For anything that has moved into 12 inches, sure they might be able to deal damage, but also be in charge threat range next turn, and it's hard to go too far wrong, I think. Otherwise, they've got loads of situational stuff that could be alright. Fallback, shoot and charge for a CP it could be quite good if they're in a protracted combat. That's probably one of the best ones, as it could allow them to really get off that mortal wound attack maximally. And otherwise, there's EMP grenades to debuff an enemy vehicle for -1 to hit in their enemy turn. One command point for extra AP if you've got another unit in the fight phase that's also just targeted that same unit. I feel like that's a bit situational really. And Grizzly Feast, if you wipe out an enemy unit, then you can trigger battle shocks on other enemy units within 6 inches in their command phase. Could be a bit of a Hail Mary coin flip sort of chance to take the enemy off a primary objective, though it's far from reliable. Between all these, I'd certainly say that Hidden Hunters is perhaps one of the best. Fallback, shoot and charge could be great for the lances and the mortal wounds, and actually the grenade stratagem from the core rulebook could be interesting enough. Between that and the mortal wound impact hits, you could be doing something like 6 mortal wounds on average out of a unit of 3 of them, which could really help them deal with the tougher stuff out there. Otherwise, for the Tau Empire detachments, there's really not that much support. Lots of their buffs and stratagems can affect the Kroot units, but just don't tend to be that relevant on melee stuff. Montkai and Kauyon both have their primary attacks being range damage dealers, which these guys don't care about too much. Perhaps some more interesting stratagems out of that. Montkai's got a 2 CP for -1 damage in the enemy shooting phase if you wanted to make them super durable, or 1 for auto advance 6 inches if you were trying to get them up the board quickly. Kaoyon's got that grenade stratagem for a -2 inches to the charge debuff when they're charged by something else. The Retaliation Cadre only has battlesuit things really, so it isn't quite as relevant there. Basically in these detachments they'll have to carry themselves via their own merit and the strengths of their datasheets, plus any supporting things they might be able to get from Shapers. Overall though, I think they're a pretty fun and interesting datasheet, certainly something very different that the Tau couldn't access before. Farsight's maybe been supplanted now as the most threatening close combat unit in the army. For strengths and weaknesses, they've got lots of wounds at toughness 6 that some enemies are really going to struggle to deal with. Mass volume attacks in close combat are pretty ruinous to hordes and medium infantry units, and the mortal wounds help them round out against things like heavies. Having a close combat unit for Tau is just pretty handy to have around, given that it's often in the enemy's best interest to rush the gun line as fast as possible. If you've got a unit of these that you don't really want to be any closer to, then it might give them a pause or give them two bad options: either move forward and get charged by these, or stay back and allow the rest of the gun line to function intact. The scout move's nice for early game positioning, either getting into the midfield or hiding if it's the opponent first turn. And as mentioned from the Kroot detachment, they have lots of good synergies with that. Both the core rules can be meaningful, and the one command point hide a unit stratagem is particularly great. For weaknesses though, they do have pretty slow movement, and on a mounted model that could cause issues. They might sometimes be getting charged as opposed to doing the charging themselves, and that is a downside for their mortal wound damage. That mortal wound special rule definitely has its downsides as well. It really is the thing that helps carry them against the tougher targets and make them somewhat good against those. You have to be charging from kind of close to get all the models into engagement range, which just isn't going to happen sometimes. And if you are in some sort of protracted melee, you won't be getting those on the second strike around unless you say in the Kroot detachment using that fallback shoot and charge strat. Still though, I feel like they are a pretty interesting unit, definitely have the stats to be good at the right points cost. I guess we'll have to see what Games Workshop eventually decide on for them. In any case, let me know your thoughts on the unit down in the comments below. Look forward to hearing all your thoughts and ideas on them. I'll certainly be looking forward to making a few more Tau Codex reviews over the next few days. I might do a roundup of major changes next, then maybe a look at the crisis suits while I'm working on the big Codex review. Feel free to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see any of that. I'll certainly keep the videos coming. And finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages: seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.